estimates.
Well, I know that if I were a contractor and bidding for this, even though the prices haven't gone up, making a bid for, 5 years from now, I would put that into my bid, because it's better to bid too high than to bid too low.
That's absolutely right, and that's
So
where
we might see those kind of things just in the bid.
and this sort of lends us to the sooner we can get the cost certainty, what sooner we can lock in the project prices, the better we are. Further out there's a lot more uncertainty. One thought is, the market has been substantially going up. Are we about to hit a down cycle, and could these costs come down lower? So that's also an uncertainty out there.
So what's this 5% based on?
So we looked at the data. We can go back to the May 29th workshop. We looked at the cost indices in the San Francisco Bay Area and in the Santa Cruz area, and we compared 3 indices, and based on that, we felt the average from 2013 or 2012 until now was about 5%. That is, so that's a.
And it's not accelerating or decelerating?
No,
So you use the average?
There's ups and downs. So there's this was the average for that area. There's always the ups and downs for it. Okay. So. If you recall, we talked about the window of opportunity and the real, these are the timely, good water quality, reliable source. And there was another aspect we talked about during the May 29th workshop is our customers value these qualities, and it's up to us to make sure these are also done on a cost-effective basis. And that cost-effective is where the grant opportunities come in. So these are again the quick review of the Title 16 grant. The window of opportunity, again, July 27th, that's due 3 days from now. Some of these recommendations that we are talking about, preliminary recommendations, need to go in this application. And the other one is the Prop 1. This is the bigger part, $50 million. And that is due on August 3rd. That's a week later. So the reason for pushing some of these workshops and delivery recommendations is to provide an idea of if and when the EIR is certified, project is selected, that project is ready to move forward. And it shows the overall project readiness. It makes our project look more eligible, better suited for receiving the funding. Just a quick item to point out, this March 2023, this is that push pin on the back end when these funds need to be expended from the project standpoint. So that sort of pegs our schedule on the back end, and that's what we need to work towards achieving. So yeah, we are going to hold off, just do the planning, and if the EIR gets certified, then we are setting up the framework to allow us to accelerate and deliver this project.
That's a quick question.
Yeah.
There was an article that Mark Mahon sent about, other Prop 1 monies going out and picking a bunch of big projects. That hasn't affected the availability of this for us, right?
That was a different one. That was surface water storage.
Different pool
But
of
they
money.
mentioned groundwater stuff too in that particular one, so it's a different.
Well, it's storage is what it is.
Storage and recovery.
Okay, so not groundwater quality.
Yeah, this one is specifically for
Quality.
prevention and cleanup. And
Okay, when they mentioned groundwater, I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
There are all kinds of
So that's
pigeonholes.
Yeah.
I was wondering, because I was wondering the same thing. I saw it.
Okay, well, I'm glad I wasn't.
And I think we could refer back to the May 29th. I think Melanie has done a wonderful job. Circle.
The little one has like all these little
Right.
circles.
Right, I remember that.
And
Different bucket.
the bucket that we are applying for hasn't been tapped so heavily
Right.
yet.
Got it.
So
Seawater intrusion makes us available for this.
Right.
And the bucket you're looking at required you to have a nexus with the delta, which of course we've never.
Oh, right, right,
So
okay.
it's a good thing we're not in that category.
So this sort of, just to help get the context set of why we are talking about delivery models while EIR is still under consideration, hasn't been certified. Well, it's all about grant applications. We want to make sure that our project looks ready and delivery models are selected within allowable. And again, I want to emphasize that these are preliminary recommendations. Nobody's locked in. As we move along, It's subject to change as more information comes through, but it sort of helps us guide the process further.
It shows we're at least thinking about these
Well, at least
issues.
trying to meet the deadline.
Deadlines, yes, correct.
Yeah.
I think this is where my role finishes, and I hand it over to Lefwin, but just to give you a quick, these are different models that we talked about during last workshop. And this is just to recap or to get the terminology: design, bid, build, construction management at risk. So we can pause here and then see if you have any comments based on the TM, or we can go through the schedule, which is really the next crux of the overall presentation.
I'm Lefwin. I haven't met some of you, but this is where we left off last time, so.
And Lefwin is in our Denver office. He is the past president of Water Design Build Council. He advises clients on the delivery models and especially on the procurement piece. So he brings a lot of his expertise into procurement, delivery, selection. So any questions before we jump into the
Dive
schedule?
in.
Let me mention just off the top of my head, my vision for this. The thing that I appeal most to is the San Diego desal project with Poseidon and IDE and so forth. It has the nice feature. They, like us now, were jumping in something they didn't know anything about. And what they did is they got these folks to come in and design the thing, build the thing, and agree to operate it for 30 years to supply them water each year for the next 30 years, which means if they screwed up in the design or the building, they would need to fix it in order to continue to deliver for those 30 years that they had contracted with. And that kind of gives them some certainty that, they don't have to be intensely involved in the design or the construction, because they know if there are little gotchas in there, that'll get fixed by the same firm who then has to operate it for 30 years. And so that kind of thing.
But I thought there's some legal limitations.
There are.
Right?
And
But then you guys mentioned in here, and maybe it's a good time to ask.
Yes.
It said operational and life cycle considerations are critical to the program's success, so it is initially recommended that integration of the O&M scope be added under a separate contract from the DB procurement, but is it with the same firm then, or?
Probably not.
If you, I promise to answer that
Okay,
as we
all right.
go along, because it gets a little tricky. We're going to talk about designing and building it first, then we'll make sure to cover
And I
that.
had another question.
Yes,
I was asking about this. I saw it mentioned through the technical memo, the linear design, and are there any ways around that? Since you said that suggested that it would take longer.
right. The linear process of design, bid,
Bid,
build
build.
here
So
is linear in time.
do you foresee any possibility of overlapping on some of these tasks?
Yes, and we'll talk about it, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
I'd like to ask about one thing you already said was the definite, which is that you mentioned that we know how to build wells. Every 5 years we probably build a well, so we do it. But we also do a lot of pipeline stuff. So I'm wondering why that needs to be.
I was wondering that same
Very,
question.
very good. So
We don't have to do it now, but
we will get into
Well,
that
I thought-
discussion. Yes,
And then
absolutely.
you recommended the CMAR one
Yeah.
for that, but
which is a thing that we've never dealt with.
it's pretty close to
So,
that.
yes, so CMAR is, as you recall from the last workshop, is just an extension of the traditional design bid build, how you have been doing the projects. It's just one added element. The benefit of it, it's something
Yeah.
Lefwin would dive into.
Yep.
And there are nuances between the Poseidon or the Southern California project versus ours in terms of who our partners are, what quality water, and how we are operating. So a lot of those things would play into the effect, but I think, and then the funding sources. So
The big differentiation between Poseidon is it's a good model conceptually, but it was a privately developed project that was then brought, the water was then sold to the public entity. So a little bit of a different genesis in what you can do that way, right? So what we're trying to do is cherry pick the best aspects of that delivery model and come up with something. So I apologize for my scratchy voice. Coming off a long weekend
Somebody's trying to
here.
come in.
Lefman just got done with his daughter's wedding this past weekend. And
Congrats, man.
There were a lot of cigars.
Was that a CMAR project?
It was,
Design bid build project.
I can tell you that it was not on budget. Maybe I should be the one talking about budget.
Oh, I got one coming up in 2 months. Don't tell me.
So, this is where we left off, and our takeaway from our last session here was to really look hard at some of the benefits around design build for two primary drivers which underlie the tech memo that we gave you. One was schedule and being able to overlap things and basically not have to do things in a precise end-to-end linear order, not to be confused with the linear pipelines, but the time over schedule. And the other was the transfer of performance risk, so that you could hold an entity, a design build entity, responsible for the performance of the treatment process itself, which we talked about last time is not something you can generally do at this end of the spectrum with traditional delivery. And so to foreshadow a little bit, the reason the pipelines fall on this side of this magic line in traditional delivery is you don't really have performance issues with pipelines. Everyone is pretty comfortable that if you design a pipeline of a certain size and with certain standards, it's going to transmit the amount of water you intended, and it's pretty unusual that that wouldn't work as planned. Whereas a treatment process with all the mechanical components and the water coming in at a certain quality and having to come out at a certain quality and quantity is a much more complex thing, where you may want some skin in the game by the folks who build it, that when you turn it on, it'll work. So that's where remember that magic dividing line from our last conversation is where plants will fall in this discussion on one side and the pipelines will fall on the other, and your wells will actually fall even more traditionally. So what we did is we started with a blank slate, and it literally is a blank slate here. And our takeaway was to put together sort of a customized, I sometimes describe it as Lego blocks, the best components of all those delivery models that really align with your project challenges. And one of the things that we didn't particularly pay attention to was any constraints on whether it's been done exactly this way before. Everything we're talking about in some shape or form has been done in the procurement world, but maybe not in the exact same mix and match fashion. And so part of our approach to this is not to just take something off the shelf and plop it on the table and say, you know, they did this so in such and such way down the road and you should use it too, because your project is different. And so let's pick out all the different challenges you have and see if we can find the right path for your needs. And so
what Lefman is alluding to is, you know, our partners, our timeline, our funding sources,
Yep.
our objectives, all of that combined, what is the right mix overall?
So we'll start with the plants, and this was with the technical memo as a design build approach. We have some basic underlying assumptions on this schedule, and again, as Anupa mentioned, this is preliminary because we're doing planning level work here, right? So we have 2018 and through the first month of 2019 really set aside for planning, and so we're assuming that the environmental clearances are not there and that your project really can't take off in a detailed fashion until the new year of 2019, the new calendar year. And that's just
But Bruce wants it to be called project planning.
yeah. Excuse me.
Which I agree.
There's some general phases here. We know we're going to plan. We're going to go buy the services for design and construction. Part of that effort to procure is to get a price, right? To get a number that really matters. It's not a budget, but someone willing to do something for a given amount of money. And then we're going to go build, and then we're going to go perform. And that substantial completion date is really tied to 2022.
So
So this is our framework, right?
For some of these, we don't actually get a price, we get pricing, like a
That's right.
maximum or a shared pricing.
Yeah, this is just shorthand, yep. So here's the assumption. When we talk about design build, normally we talk about a fixed price model where you get a price, right? And so we started there. We didn't model this with design bid build for the plants because we know sort of just inherently from the last presentation we did, that you can't make the schedule work if you bump everything up end to end. And we even more importantly know that you can't hold someone accountable for the performance of the facility in the same way you can as with design build. So we started with design build, but I'm going to walk through a sequence of scenarios here that led us to the conclusion we gave to you. And so we're going to walk through a couple things that we considered and threw out, right? And the first one here is this fixed price design build, and I'll show you why it sort of works but doesn't work.
And real quick on this one, as Lefman is talking about treatment plant, he's sort of a generic term for both.
Yeah, I'll cover that.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah. So let's go ahead.
Why can't we start doing some of the design in 2018, even before it's a
Just being conservative, that we're assuming that because of the environmental clearances, that if you can get a head start, and if that works out, terrific, but just trying to be very clear on the dividing line here.
Right.
Just being conservative.
If the funding is available and if we are able to do that, that gets us that much ahead.
Yeah.
But right now we just assume this way.
This is worst case. Okay.
Yeah, every bar on here costs money, so don't forget that as well. So we have this thing called a basis of design, and this is really defining the components. If you call the whole thing a project, each package with that project, each plant, each component that you're going to put out to bid, you've got to be able to tell somebody what you want. And so this is all of the work done to really define the packages or the individual project components, right? And so the percentages we'll use in here are levels of design or levels of definition. And so obviously 100% would be full bid documents. 20% is something considerably less than that. They're all subject to a lot of interpretation, so we're using them fairly generically, but they do map to each other through each of the scenarios, right? So we would be doing some work in 2019, and at some point we would go out and procure a design builder, right? So the first consideration when you're talking about design build procurements is a one-step or two-step procurement. We talked a little bit about that last time. The typical way is to put out a qualifications step, which is usually a couple months. You get interested parties, you might get a lot of them, and then you evaluate who's able and willing to do the work, and usually you go down to a short list of qualified firms that you then issue a request for proposals to. If you recall, the reason for doing that is that this is a very expensive and time-consuming process. It costs companies a lot of money to do these bids, and so your interest is in that you have qualified respondents. The market's interest is that they can be competitive and they're not competing against 10 other people for the same work, and so you do this two-step process to narrow the field. There is a one-step procurement model. It's up here mostly for the next sequence we're going to look at, but there is a decision around whether you're able to do a one-step model and whether it's in your interest to do that. And so we put that, you'll see a list come up here of things we need to decide as we're going forward. This is one of the things that we don't have the answer to yet, but we want to put it on the list, right?
Wouldn't the one-step limit the amount of people that would bid for that?
In fixed price design build, it absolutely limits the number of proposers who want to go at it with a bunch of other ones. When you get to some of the other models, it's actually more attractive to the bidding committee. So it depends on which one you're doing.
With the fixed prices, one of the disadvantages that there's a motivation for them to maybe build it for less cost to get the same result, and maybe I felt like maybe it would encourage firms to skimp somehow.
Question. There is a opinion out there that if you do a fixed price model without a strong operational component, that you have to be careful to specify quality in your project, or you run the risk of getting lower quality. That would be the best way I could say.
It's harder to determine best value.
Yeah.
They're going to pitch all their innovative ideas then,
Yeah.
and then it'll be up to the team here to assess if that's truly going to pan out. And you won't know until you build it, obviously.
So here's the timing challenge here. To do a fixed price procurement, to put an RFP out here, you really have to have a very well-defined project. And that's really driven by this quality question. Because you have to think of all the things that you want to make sure they have in it, and all the things that you want to make sure they don't do in terms of shorting you on quality. And so it takes quite a bit of upfront preparation, and you can't do it until you have a very strong basis of design and a lot of upfront staff work to put that RFP out. These RFPs are massive documents because they define all the rules that design builders are bidding by. And it's very common, productive way to do it on a complex project where you can define those rules. One of the things we talked about last time we were together was you may not have that luxury of the staff engineers and resources to really even know what rules of the game to put in these kind of RFPs. So that's one of the downsides of this.
But isn't this, I mean, to me, isn't this technology pretty well established and pretty, it seems like, I mean, you have certain components that are going to be similar for every one of them.
Right, so there are elements, devil is always in the detail.
I mean, they're all going to have microfiltration or reverse
Right.
osmosis.
It's about how you arrange them and how you size them.
And how you fit it into the site,
Okay.
acceptance.
But as far as quality, it seems like you should, if you size it appropriately, it should be extremely good quality.
There's a lot of room. I mean, just think of your car buying experience. You could buy a Yugo, or you can name your premium brand, and they both in some ways meet certain specifications, and in some ways there's a very distinct difference in quality.
But if it is those details that are important, I'm surprised the 20% basis of design gives you enough to do an RFP.
It does, but it's you know, again, that 20% is open to some interpretation, so some parts of it might be closer to 100, some parts might be 0. It's that sort of an average,
So
but there's a lot of project definition up front.
Without getting into too much detail, one of the examples could be the membranes have to operate, or warranty could be three years
Yeah.
for this flux rate, and we can define it up to that point. So if it breaks in between, it's on them to fix it. So just defining even in that 20% 3 years and, you know, this flux rate, that's enough definition, 20%, to put it out there
Yeah.
without having to.
A lot of it's in redundancy requirements. How many
That's
spare
good.
tires do you want built into this thing?
Lots.
So, you know, if you don't tell them, they're not going to put it in there, and so you've got to define those up front. And so there's a lot of upfront work here. What we're really looking at trying to evaluate on this fixed price model, where it works, is to get what I call shovel ready quickly. Can you get this project procured in alignment with the funding streams and in time to get it built by when you need it built, right? So that's the first filter of challenges that we're evaluating this model in. The second is just these questions we're talking about. Do you have enough hands-on preferentially between yourselves and Santa Cruz to really address some of these nuances? As Anoop says, it's devils in the details. Do you want, you know, Sonny in the design mix working with this design builder? This fixed price model is very much a transactional model where you define what you want, you put it out there, they give you a proposal back. The level of interaction is formalized in the procurement process, and it's a competitive process, and so your ability to interact with all the various teams is somewhat limited, right? And it's a design competition, so they're all coming at it from different perspectives, and so it does, you know, it engenders a design competition, but it's not exactly a collaborative process in terms of everybody bouncing ideas off of each other, because you've got multiple teams competing. So there's times when that's really good, there's times when that's maybe not what you want. And so as we were looking at this model, the fixed price model, which is not the model we recommended, if you remember, right? Because there's reasons why this doesn't work, but we wanted to start somewhere. The next thing we wanted to say is, okay, is this one package or two packages between the different procurements, right? Or, you know, we were calling projects or packages, either one. For the purposes of this analysis, we're treating it as one. We haven't evaluated whether these should be procured separately or together between the tertiary treatment and the advanced treatment.
And
The timelines will be the same. they could be two of them, and so for simplicity's sake, we got one timeline that encompasses both plants.
And a lot of those details would evolve over the next 6 months duration
Yeah.
as we continue discussion and review with Santa Cruz.
We have a good running list of the pros and cons for 2 procurements versus 1 and vice versa, but we haven't addressed that yet. It's sort of, it's out there, it's looming, it's on the list. It doesn't affect this analysis so much, I suppose. We could ultimately use different delivery methods for each of the plants, but at this high level, we're assuming you use the same for each one.
Within the design build
Within the
context.
design build context. So, design build, fixed price, design build procurements, they take a while. So this is about 7 months. Because what these companies are doing in this RFP period is they're actually taking your basis of design, fleshing it out, and giving you a solid, firm, fixed price for building and designing this thing and promising that it will work, right? So it takes a while for them to do that. It's very costly for them to do that. I mention that because in the market right now, it's a very hot market. When we're making investment decisions on what projects to propose on, fixed price ones are very difficult to justify. They're very expensive, and so you're looking for the big ones to spend your money on, because doing this design is on your own nickel as a design builder. Your project, I think Sunny probably falls in the medium to smaller category on the size of big water projects right now, and so I would expect a little bit of market resistance at the level of investment required, especially if you separate the 2 plants into separate projects. But assume you go this way, you can get to a point in mid-2020 where you'd have a design builder on board and they would go do their thing, complete the design and construction in parallel with each other, and have a pretty good amount of time to build it, over 30 months to build it. Some of the challenges with this is it is a slower start, right? So we're in mid-2020 before we select it, and that's when you know the price, by the way. And so that's a good year, 2 years from now out, right? So that's one downside to this model. All this stuff in green, as I mentioned earlier, costs money. So you have a pretty complex front end. A lot of owners find it worthwhile to invest that front end when they have the resources to do it. Limited design involvement bullet up here. The other downside of this is it is a very transactional type sequence, and so, you know, our ability and Sunny's ability to really interact with these teams and say, no, we want it this way. You got to tell all 3 teams you want it that way. They're going to push back. One team's not going to want to do it that way, and so you have a different dynamic here that may not match what you will want to do, and then that delayed price certainty pretty late in the process. So we do leave this, so we say let's look at the next thing. Let's look at progressive design build. But we do know just from this first one, we've got to figure out whether this is a 1-step or 2-step procurement. We need to figure out whether this is 1 procurement or 2 procurements for the plants, and we need to figure out whether fixed price really works or progressive DB works. We didn't solve the first 2. We're going to put those on the list for later, but we did tackle the third one, right? Progressive or fixed price. So, any questions on this model before we go to the next iteration of? Okay. So we've backed it up a little bit, and let's just take.
I have a kind of a 30,000-foot question.
Yep.
So you've got some lines here, and you have to put something on there. So what's the uncertainty in this? You know, if in terms of timelines.
Yeah, that's a good question. So these green lines, the uncertainty is when you can start them.
Okay.
The durations are pretty industry standard. Like what a design build procurement takes, whether it's a $100 million project or $200 million, might change that by a month, but it's pretty consistent. And you go out to the design build community, they're going to expect a 6-month or an 8-month RFP, right?
So the main difference is how many people they put onto the RFQ.
Yeah, how many people they put on it and whether it's worth their investment. When you get to the construction side, this is an industry best practice, and it's sort of scaled to the time you have available. we'll never show this line going over in these scenarios. And so the assumption here is that you will resource the job to the time you have, and that we can then make an evaluation of whether it's reasonable. And so, my back of the envelope for this size job for 30 months is, 2.5 years is pretty good for plants these size. This doesn't make me too nervous. It's not a piece of, not a walk in the park, but you get it done.
You can only compress the schedule so much on the construction side.
That's right.
They can force people, put more people in, but getting the equipment, getting the things installed, and permitting, all of that has a fixed element. It's in the contractor's best interest to finish up job quickly. Time is money, so they will be incentivized to finish the project overall. But we want to give them enough room, enough time to build it right.
I mean, we could show this as a year, and it just wouldn't be realistic, right? You could show this with 6 more months, and it might be nicer, but it's doable. So we took this, we said, okay, yes?
But on that same vein, that end date is what we tell them to. So just like any other construction project, if you don't meet that date, LDs are assessed.
Yeah, that's right. And the LDs on these projects are significantly different because you're not just judging whether it's built. Liquidated damages. You're actually requiring it to work by the date that you promised. And so your penalties
worked.
That's right.
It's just an example. There's plants where it worked, meaning the water quality is all produced, but the road hasn't been paved, the building, maybe a wall missing, right? So it depends on how you define the substantial completion.
Yeah, and that's why this is called substantial completion, not final completion, because there might be some things that aren't done yet that you don't care about, but you got to define what you do care about, which is water coming out of the pipe. That's the quality you want.
The project down a couple of miles down the bay, I think they're looking at being able to deliver the water by May of 2019.
Yeah.
A lot of landscaping, road access, and so on and so forth. They may not be ready, but membrane units would be plumbed and would be pumping water. That's what they are shooting for.
You asked about the durations here. One of the other things you'll see consistently is a pretty chunky, I would call it chunky, startup and commissioning, hold back a time, because it's tied. If you're gonna start charging these guys liquidated damages for not working, they got to build in time to get it to work. And so a traditional construction project might short that, because they say as long as we can sort of get the water through here, everybody's going to sign off if it's built, and some of that might slip past substantial completion. This is all assuming that any responsible design builder is going to really make sure the thing passes what's called an acceptance test at the end, and that you have a couple times to start that thing over again, because these things don't always work. Even the good projects, when you first turn them on, except for Sunny's always work.
Right. and
right, Sonny?
Not work, just clarifying, it's more about working out the kinks.
Yeah, there's a lot of kinks. These are very complex, a lot of moving parts, and you might, I've been on a couple of these where you have to run the thing continuously for 30 or 60 days. You miss one day in there, you got to start over again. If that happens to be day 59, you need some time.
And that's why it's important to design build. We sort of put that onus of working out the kinks and delivering the right quality water onto the design builder. That's why we want to recommend.
So we reserve a good amount of time at the end of this in our thinking, because that is a different mindset. So let's move to progressive design build. So we're going to go to a progressive design build project. I kept the fixed price timeline on here so you can keep in your mind's eye some comparison, right? Now, we're going to have a different set of issues, right? One thing we can do with a progressive design build procurement is we can start the procurement process as we're doing the basis of design, because you don't need all the detail in the RFP that you do for a fixed price design, because you're really asking for a much more generic approach. You're not asking for design builders to design the thing as part of the procurement. You're going to do that with the one team you select. You have to do less basis of design yourselves as part of the overall programmatic side of it, and so you can start cheating the start date, and I don't mean cheating in a pejorative way, but you can start accelerating when you start the work, and you can do a much more streamlined procurement, and you can have the option of a one-step procurement here, because now you're not asking for the same level of investment from design builders.
In particular, they're not giving you a price at that point.
They're giving you a fee, they're not so they're technically giving you a price, but they're not giving you a fixed price.
Or total, yeah.
They're giving you a fee, a percentage on cost.
Yes.
And so when you do those basis of design things, like if you want to have certain criteria, is that where you give criteria like what you want in your design? Like you wanted to have this much redundancy?
That's right.
These safeguards, you know,
But it could
besides
be,
the quality of water.
that's right, but it could be
Okay.
much less detailed.
Right.
This because you have a chance to work with the design builder on that after they're selected, because
Got it.
they'll be doing a lot of detail after the fact. And so,
So the RFQ would be incredibly important that you get the right person, right?
that's right.
And so how can you do a one-step procurement without that?
We generally combine the RFQ and RFP into one piece, because and it really focuses as much on quals as their approach. So in a two-step procurement, you've got where they've done it before and are they qualified to do it, and the RFP generally focuses on their approach to doing it and their ideas that are specific to your
So the
project.
RFQ is not to pick the one, it's to weed out the ones.
Is to get it down to a shorter list.
Yes.
And
More
so-
qualified.
You do RFPs.
Yeah.
So typically, the way it will work, you might get 6 or 7 or 10 submitters of RFQs, you narrow them down to 3. 3 of them would then go through the RFP process, and they would go into more detail on their approach to the specific requirements of this job, not just their general qualifications. If you do a one-step procurement, you throw that all into one mix, you might get 8 or 9 submittals. It's a lot more work to evaluate, but you save a lot of time. And so there's some trade-offs.
A little bit, right now, every month, maybe 2 months.
Yeah, it's also much more market attractive, and this is something actually, the reason it's on the list is something we might want to test. We might want to ask the design builders if there's a preference. It's not even clear that you can actually do a one-step procurement, it's just an optional list.
But if you comment on that one-step procurement, you're gonna have to score the qualifications and the approaches together.
Yeah.
So you may have let's say, a lesser qualified firm score higher because they're approached.
Yeah.
But they may not be as qualified as some others. So
Yeah.
that's some of the challenges. You're weighing the both together now,
Yeah.
rather than just looking at qualifications purely and then the best approach.
Yeah. Sometimes you do it in a little internal short list before you read the rest of them.
Yeah.
So there's different, it's just an option at this point. So I'm not even sure I would recommend it, but it's nice to have it on the table, because you might get some market feedback. If the market's really hot and I don't have to do both steps, and you can just give me one RFP and I'll give you my best shot, you might get a higher response rate.
I suppose you could get rid of the RFQ if you put that in your specs. We want someone who's done this and that.
Yeah, that's generally what you do in a one-step.
Okay.
Sort of.
So
short cut.
pre-qualify them,
Yeah.
they qualify themselves.
To
Yeah,
set the
that's
boundaries
right.
within that, yeah.
That's right, exactly right. Okay, so if we do that, then we have a lot less upfront work to get to the procurement side, and so we can, again, have the same issue about whether we're talking one plant or 2 here. We'll just show you one timeline for both. Now we can get the design builder on sooner, right? And the first step of the progressive design build is called the pre-construction phase. In the book that you have, the conventional wisdom right now is the sweet spot is to hire that design builder, start working through all those details that we were doing in green before. We're now using the design builder to do the upfront work and working with them interactively, usually to a 60% design before you get to a nice tight price, right? And that's the way the larger progressive design build projects are working right now. And then you decide on that number and you go forward.
Didn't you guys suggest like an off-ramp
Yep.
somewhere before then?
We're getting there. Yeah. So this is the normal progression. When you do this, we've now solved the fast start problem. We're getting started a lot sooner on a procurement. We've simplified the procurement a lot, and so you're spending less money on green and more money on blue, which is always my goal. Blue is the project, green is
Overhead.
The soft
is
cost, yeah.
us guys
Yeah.
talking to you, right? So I'm about doing and more doing and less talking. And we've solved the hands-on involvement part. We've moved a lot of this basis to design. Now you're working with the design builder and you can talk to them because they've been selected and you can really go through the iterative collaborative process. What we haven't solved, if you look at this line here, is the delayed price certainty. Because if we take this, you're going to have some iterative numbers in here. It's called progressive because you have progressive definition of the job. But in this version of progressive design build, just by fluke of the calendar, you're going to get to a final design build price just about the same time frame you would have done if you did a fixed price procurement.
The
Right?
GMP is the guaranteed maximum price,
Yeah.
and that, right, GMP also becomes available or known
Yeah.
right around the same time.
It could be a lump sum. You don't have to do a guaranteed maximum price, just to refresh everybody's memory, is the maximum you'll pay. If they go build it and they come in less, you can get all or some of it back. Most owners split it 50-50, right? A lump sum means it's what you will pay, right? And so you could just set them loose and never look at the books again, right? It's more like a fixed price. You can choose which model to use when you get there. Some owners want insight to what the actual costs are, and they don't want the contractor making a windfall. They want to incentivize the contractor to save money even from the GMP. And so if you do some sort of shared savings approach, it's quite attractive. Some owners don't want to bother with the paperwork. You're at a GMP, go build it, we'll give you that much money.
If you get grant funding, do they require that you have all those costs pretty well documented?
Usually here, but not past, so.
But for like reimbursements, they don't,
For the reimbursement, yes.
they're gonna
The
want that.
windfall piece,
You
yeah.
have all the
Yeah, I mean,
invoices.
costs are documented here in a detailed estimate, right?
Because part of the thing is, you're still making the progress payments. So ultimately, the progress payments
Yeah.
are going to be
Everything you're paying out is based on actual work on the ground.
Right, so if it comes in under the
Under, so
GMP,
you're-
that's actually what you get the funding for.
correct.
That's right. Most owners don't have an ability to take home the shared savings and put it, like they're usually not gonna give it back to wherever they came from. So they use it to expand the scope, buy extra equipment or, dig another well or more redundancy. in the
Extra
plant.
warranty, like
Yeah.
always buy more warranty.
So usually the owner's share of any shared savings gets reinvested as more stuff.
Yeah.
That's just practice, just reality of the way funding
You
works.
could buy more spares or something.
Yep.
Is there a danger if you're incentivizing decreasing the cost that the quality suffers?
No, I think that those parameters are established up front. What what comes out of the treatment plant water quality, that has to be permitted. None of that changes.
I'm not talking water quality, I'm talking about quality of the plant.
Yeah, it's pretty well set here. You can, if they want to do something that's going to save costs, it's a mutual decision. So,
Okay.
yeah, they don't get to just do it,
You don't
right?
want hot metal instead of
But
stainless steel.
what this
Okay.
protects you from is that they priced for the tariffs and the tariffs didn't happen. They don't take a windfall of a 20% extra, price in the steel because it didn't happen. Now you are protected if they agreed to do it here and then that windfall, that tariff comes in later, they're on the hook for it. This is entirely a plus side to the owner. That's why it's a guaranteed maximum price.
I imagine it really is in your best interest to define quality as clearly and
That's right.
and numerically as
And
you
that's
can
what this is
up front,
about. Yeah.
which is hard work.
Well, that's why they progressive is 60% design. By then, you've already identified those things in your specs. You will really your.
But if you can tell them that up front, even before pre-construction
Yeah.
happens, they can design to that specification rather than whittle around and, oh, that's not it, well, let's whittle around some more.
It is a challenge here. Part of this pricing risk for you all is that you get to this number, fairly late in the game. It's still in red up here. And so what do? You can't, you're not forced to sign a contract with this design builder at this point. You have what's called the off-ramp, and you can go take the work they've done and do something else with it. The challenge is on a schedule-driven project like this is you don't have a lot of extra time, right? So that's the off-ramp risk. And so with the 60% GMP, to take the off-ramp. This is the off-ramp. You say, no, Mr. Design Builder, we think somehow or another you're hiding money in here. We don't like what you're proposing in terms of quality. You're not being flexible with us. We don't think you can do it. We're gonna pull the trigger and we're gonna go do some sort of new procurement, right?
Get a new contractor.
You get a new contractor. Most of the time, this means you have someone finish the plans. Either you have the design builder finish the plans, or we would finish them, and you go and hard bid it, right? Just put it out and get a contractor. And so you have a nice stick here because no design builder wants this to happen, right? They're not making their money here, they're gonna make their money there. And so this is a legitimate stick, a carrot and stick that you have. It's a little less threatening though when they know that if you do that, you're gonna miss your end date. And so a lot of owners have an issue with progressive design build because in a tight market like this is looking like it's gonna be, they sort of don't have a lot of credibility. They know once they're doing pre-construction, eventually you're gonna agree to their number because you don't have the time to do something different.
I think that would be why in the RFQ kind of phase, you'd want to pick someone who's done this many times and never caused that to happen.
That's right. And that's a very good point, because this is actually a very, very rare occurrence. In my career, I've been personally involved in twice that this has happened. I can count on one hand that I'm aware of. But if you go to the conferences, this is all the talk right now, because it's a tight market and because owners are they have worries about this, and so I don't want to downplay it. It's a risk, and it's one of the ones that we look to solve when we get to our ultimate recommendation here.
Most of the time, GMP, we're talking about is still the numbers, their percent profit, their markups, their rates, all of those are very transparent. So you're actually comparing their open books to books.
Yeah.
So there's not much.
Good point.
All of this pricing that's done in here, the contractor's self-performance, you have to do quite a bit of scrutiny that their production rates and what they're paying for their people and so forth. But a good chunk of this work is actually bid out in a traditional way as subcontracts. And so you have a lot of clarity and a lot of competitive tension happening for a pretty good chunk of the work in here anyway. That's why this is pretty rare to happen, but it can happen, and so we have to plan for it.
So a new, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
If I understood you correctly, when you go past that, progressive design, build, construction phase, you're saying it's an open book thing because the potential
Open book
cost
all the way around.
all the way through.
All the way through. If you stay with the GMP. If you go to a lump sum, you close the book after you have the GMP, and they just do their thing.
Yeah, just one of the things they could do in the qualification stage is the references.
Yeah.
That's a key element to make sure, and also not just the contractor, but their team, that they work together and check with their references to make sure things like that haven't happened with them in the past.
But we have to protect your interests, right? And so we have to assume even if you do all that due diligence, you still have to have a viable threat of the off-ramp. And I don't use threat, with a capital T, but it's an incentive and a pro and a con, right?
So then they come up with a reasonable deal.
Come up with a reasonable price, not try and hide anything in there, and to be really aggressive in how they get there. And so we noodled over this quite a bit. It's like, how can we take advantage of all the things that we fixed by going to progressive, but now we introduce this off-ramp risk, right?
I've got a quick question.
Yeah.
At the point you take the off-ramp, the design is done, right?
It's mostly done.
And you guys go ahead usually and finish it up?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so then what you're doing at that point is you're moving into your fixed price construction point, so your delay is
Essentially,
actually about 6
It's
months.
essentially build.
Yeah.
That's
Normally, most owners who take the off-ramp go to a hard bid delivery.
And so.
We're gonna turn that on its head in a
Your delay there then is about a 6-month delay.
At least. It's at least a 6-month delay. It could be a year.
But Leslie, your point is right. So 60% in parallel with this aspect, that's when the design gets done as well. 100% design, and you're ready to.
Then you go on to build.
Yeah.
Straight to construction.
And I didn't really flesh out what you would do here because it's already too late, so took that one and threw it away.
So, question on that. So, let's say there is a delay. In this model, it's a new procurement with
Yeah.
off-ramp. Since we're assuming 5% increase a year, that translates into...
Yes, it does.
5% of the cost of the...
Well, possibly, but because if you look at, recall earlier, we looked at midpoint of construction somewhere around 2022, so all the costs are escalated over here. Midpoint of construction, all the numbers we are, even when they're giving you GMP, they're still escalating all the way up to that point already. So they have sort of built into it.
But a year later, it's 5% more. The math's the math.
That's
Yeah.
assuming things stay the same.
That's right.
Yeah.
They get worse,
Yeah.
it's more. and-
Yeah.
Correct.
Certainly both sides hurt when that off-ramp's taken.
Yeah, no one wants the off-ramp. I will stress again, it is very rare. We're talking about a less than 1% eventuality, and we're spending a lot of time on it. We need to protect your interests, but everybody gets pretty wound up about the off-ramp for something that doesn't happen very often, but you gotta plan for it, right?
So this has advantages, but are there disadvantages? Does the cost of the plant go up because of this?
Because of the off-ramp or just because of the model?
Yeah, just the design.
So that's an interesting question. Progressive is the lump sum or the fixed price design build is seen as a very cost competitive, high market tension because you have basically design competition going.
Right.
The trade-offs on that is often perceived as quality. And part of the trade-off on that is the money you're investing in the front end to write the rules of the game in a very tight way. There are some owners who see this process as less competitive. My personal opinion is that it is actually most of this work is bid out, is subcontracts anyway. And so it's actually quite competitive. And you have insight to numbers that you've never seen as an owner before, because if you've been doing design, bid, build, all of this work up front's been invisible to you through contractors. And so I actually think it's a very competitive process, but it's a fair comment.
Competitive in terms of the pricing, but collaborative in terms of you expressing what your desires and getting the plant built to your expectations, so maintaining quality. So I think
You do have, you have your project program manager, whatever word will be called at the table, Sonny and his
owner's advisor,
owner advisor, and you have a design builder. And so you do have competing perspectives that help drive innovation and cost, but you don't have three competing teams going at head to head on every design detail. And so there are some trade-offs. For this type of project, it's pretty proven stuff, so you're not having a need, in my opinion, to drive that level of competition.
I was going to ask something related to that, though, is, we've been following the last several years, the water reuse conferences and things like that. And it seems like there are new, every year there's some new technological, and I was just wondering if you've ever seen any of these off-ramps happen because the technology changed or something?
Not really. I've personally been involved in the fixed price world where someone will risk bringing new technology and risk bringing it to the market because it gives them a competitive advantage to bring it, and that's what you will not probably pick up in this model. Everybody's going to be, especially given the permitting process, everybody's going to be working with pretty proven stuff, and I think for your project, that's okay.
So
You're not looking for something that's only been used in, some Eastern European country. You've never been tested in North America.
That's exactly where I was going. In a fixed price market, you say microfiltration. There could be a manufacturer out in Europe, they want their first installation in the US and say, we'll give you a 10% discount. Now, it may do the job, but we don't want to take that first installation. In the progressive, you have the ability to say, you know what, even though it's 10% cheaper, we don't want this, we want something that's proven, and it gives you more control.
So here's where our recommendation goes to try and fix these two things, right? So, watch my pretty graphics here. There you go.
Sliding it over.
We're waiting.
Is it going backwards?
Okay.
That's a design problem.
There you go.
So what happens if we move the fixed price piece to here, and we basically shorten the pre-construction phase and lengthen this phase? So our end date's the same, and so now we've got a GMP set earlier in the process, less design done to get to the number. If you don't like the number at that point, your off-ramp actually, instead of going out to hard bid, it would actually let you take everything that you've done up to that date and package it as a design-build RFP and go out for a fixed-price procurement like you were going to originally. You lose a month or two doing that, but you don't lose a year.
How can you do a GMP with only 30% design now? I mean, you
Well-
can't, let's go down to 0% design, still do a GMP.
Well, this is the question that everyone will ask, and that you better get used to answering if you end up taking this recommendation. Here's my answer. A fixed price design build, the one we showed originally, how much design was done for those proposers to give you that number?
100%.
Well, that's...
Less than 30%.
I have a problem with that, too.
They do it all the time. The original version of progressive design build, that goes, it's dating me a little bit, going back 20 years, they were always at 30%. That's the at-risk part of this, right? And so, yes, the contingency will be higher. You might have to have a more robust shared savings so they don't walk away with a bunch of contingency. But it's certainly absolutely parallel to what the fixed price design build proposals would be, except they've had the advantage of talking to you and getting a bunch of subcontractor quotes in the meantime. And so my opinion is that it's actually quite reasonable. We're going to have to pitch it to the market and convince them, but it does get you a number much earlier, and it does give you a credible off-ramp, because if they're playing games, you're going to know early. And you can take all that work that's been done up to 30% and put a cover on it, call it an RFP, and do the fixed price model anyway. And what we did is we lopped a month or two off here on the fixed price version of this. So that's where we ended up.
So
Yes.
with this method, you might get a guaranteed price earlier, but then as you start going more through some progressive and you go, oh, no, we want this, you want this, then is that more change orders in this way versus
It
putting
could
those
be,
in early?
what it really translates to is more contingency. And one of the advantages that's in the write-up we gave you is, I actually think that the extended collaboration period of 0 to 60% is too long for the staff resources you have, and for the dynamics of working with a partner like Santa Cruz. You want to get everybody's input and decisions made early and move on. And so when you extend that out, you actually have the risk of what we call scope creep, and of the number actually going up. And so this, to me, is a blend of the fixed price model where you're asking for a hard number up front, and the benefits of the collaborative model where you do have time for input in the big decisions, but you're really leaving the details to the design builder after this point in time.
That means there's no collaboration after that earlier?
There's limited collaboration, and if you change scope after that, it does change the price.
Let's just think about in the UK, a lot of the models are only actually 10-15%.
Yeah.
And then before, so you have to think about where you're defining that 30 versus 60. That 30% design, you've done your basic design and pre-design before. You established which of the technologies you want, what your preferences, the online factory, redundancy, water quality. I think all the things that would matter to the district was going to be defined. So if you advance from 30 to 60%, what are you giving up? You might be giving up pipe support details.
Yeah.
You might be giving up the type of valves that you may be using. That you're leaving up to the contractor then to decide what's best, but not switching out the MF system, different elements. So you can probably have to look into a little more of what 30% matters to the district, to you guys, versus what you
That's
want
right.
to see 60%. I know Todd probably wants to see the pipe support too.
And instead of Todd, why don't we swap it out to Santa Cruz, for example?
Yeah.
You know, with a component of the facility being built at the Santa Cruz wastewater treatment plant, them looking to integrate their facility, they might be looking for a little bit more detail, versus here at Advanced Water Verification, whether it's Chanticleer or West Annex, you know, we can define very broadly what we want the facilities to look like, so that might be okay for 30%. So there are going to be nuances between the two
It
facilities.
does create some discipline to make your big decisions, the ones that are important to you, early in the process, and then move on. Now, there's nothing in this rule, in this model, that says when you got here, you couldn't decide you're okay with the contractor, you're okay with their 30% number, but you want to do some more design definition, and maybe it's on just a piece of the plant. And so you could decide, you could always decide to move this later, should you want to, when you're actually there. when you're comfortable that you're not going to need the off-ramp, and push some or all aspects. This doesn't have to be just one line. This is a very simplified. This, could be part of a plant. It could be as Sonny was saying, just the process equipment. And so there's flexibility to move it. But what you're trying to create is a very clear line in the sand to your design builder. And if we don't have a good number at this point, we're going to pull the plug while we still have time to pull the plug.
This is all also getting into the overall cash flow and financial planning standpoint. The sooner we know the number, the better off we are in terms of what resources, what funding aspect, what are the implications. Remember we talked about the uncertainty in the market, so on and so forth. The sooner you can lock down the number, the better off we are. There is some collaborative aspect to it.
This number might have 8 or 9% contingency instead of 4%, right? So this number might be 5% higher, give or take, because it's earlier. But remember, because of this open book process, you can get some or all of that back if it's not used, right? Or it'll get used because you missed something because it was so early and you end up using it. And so, again, the idea here is to give you the flexibility. The design builders that are out there are the same finite number of teams, and so while their initial reaction will say, oh, GMP at 30%, we can't do that, are they the same design builders who would be more than happy to give you a fixed price bid with a design they paid for that's considerably less than 30%. And that becomes our market challenge. The one piece of red that stays with this model is this early GMP defense of the early GMP is the way I put it. And to me, that one downside of defending doing this is more than offsets the benefits we gain from everything we fixed in the gray list here.
And didn't you say if you put this out there early, you generate some interest earlier,
Yeah.
and so that helps with that?
I would go to the
problem.
market with some of these issues, all the key decisions, and I'd get market feedback very early in the process.
Yeah.
That's one thing we could do if we did pick up some time in 2018. I'm doing a market sounding right now for a biogas project in Colorado. We have calls going all this week with potential bidders. They're giving us reaction to a list just like this, in conference calls. And it's a very informative process, and you start building a lot of interest in the project as well. So
that's something that we want to do, and one of the things we'll talk about in the next 6 months, 8 months time frame. We want to start reaching out to different design builders and contractors to generate interest. The more competition there is, the better off we are.
So to recap, I talked about Lego blocks of all those delivery models. This is a very standard model with 2 exceptions that are very custom to your project. One is it's not out of the average, but it is on the early side of the average of where you're going to pull the off-ramp trigger should you need to. So the 30% GMP is one thing that's different.
So in this, would you specify the duration of that contributed design, or would you specify when do you think you could do the 30%?
I would be a calendar date, actually.
You would do calendar. Okay.
If they want to do 60% design to get there and they can squeeze it in there, that's even better.
Calendar for the GMP.
It comes down to the designer, the team's preference. I know contractor-led teams, they tend to want to do less design to start building.
Yeah.
The designer-led teams want to do more design and wait for contracts. So it depends on which team and who's leading what, whether it's contractor leading or engineering consultant that's leading that team.
Well, actually, one of the other questions I had as I was reading through this is that, like, the need for an advisor with that heavy operations and management, because like those decisions, the early decisions that will be made, but also how to staff those and how the pipes a lot of decisions will be all the way through the line, including certification and production.
Yeah, the O&M piece of this is the next piece I'll show you, and it's pretty important. And I wouldn't tackle this without a pretty strong eye to the O&M side. So the early GMP is different, and then what you do in the case of the off-ramp, your plan B is different. It would be It's very unconventional to go back to another design build procurement versus a traditional procurement. And you wouldn't be locked in either way. You could decide at the last minute. But my theory here is that if you've taken it this far, you have all the makings of a pretty good RFP for a fixed price procurement. So I'm going to take everything that design builder did,
Quickly turn around.
and quickly turn it around, put a new cover on it, and that's going to be my RFP. And if you look at where we were at before, that's exactly when we were going to write the RFP before. So to me, that makes it even more credible off-ramp that, hey, design builder, you better give me a good number here. I'm going to take everything you did, and you're going to see it on the street for all your competitors to bid on. So
quick question. I assume, given the purpose of why we're doing this, we actually need to make not a decision, because it's not nailed in stone, but we need to express our preference for, is this acceptable or not?
this is the recommended. This is where we ended up, by the way, on the recommended.
But you need,
That's what I liked right away, anyway, preference.
but we need to express it so it can end up going into the funding request.
And I think it's important, so, as I mentioned earlier, all the recommendations right now are preliminary level.
Yeah.
And the grant application, the level of detail we are going in is just the design build.
Yeah.
Within that nuance, I think that nuance will be defined over the next 6 months as we are planning things out,
But
so.
I think the idea is we didn't want, recommend or state design build in the grant process unless you had internally a plan for what kind of design build.
Right.
Even if it's not explicit in there.
With the eye toward, we would go with this unless something derailed it.
Yeah.
Or put us on a
But
different
as
path.
of now,
Yeah.
let's ask, are we comfortable with this?
I am.
This is all rocket science to me.
Well, yes,
So I don't know what to be comfortable with and what not to be comfortable with.
so you're neutral then? Yes.
I know that other directors have more experience than I do in this, so yeah.
Okay. You're comfortable?
I'm comfortable, I've never done it. That
Okay. Carla?
makes sense. Well, I think so far I'm following you, and so I am. Yes, I looked at the book that you edited thoroughly, and then read this carefully over the last couple of days, and I feel like there is a rationale and I have questions about that I'm following.
So it sounds like, and I'm comfortable, so that's 4.5 out of 5.
All right, so let me throw the one last variable at you, which is the O&M piece, and see if your comfort level stays there, right? So,
That's the part I wanted to know more about.
the next thing is, how do we embed the O part of this?
How do they take responsibility?
So I'll just draw a line here. So as we alluded to in the memo, there's really, when you talk about operations and maintenance of facilities like this, there's companies out there that do it. But there's really two fundamental business models for how they do it. And it's mostly the same companies that do both. You can go out and essentially hire staff through an operations contract who will show up at your plant and run it for you on your behalf. And when something breaks at the plant, they're essentially, you're the landlord, they're renters. Their dishwasher breaks. If you're the landlord, your tenant calls you up and says, my dishwasher's broken and it's gonna, every time I wash dishes, it's gonna flood the kitchen until you come fix it. And that's contract operations model. It's very common. West Basin does it on a lot of their facilities. Monterey has contract operations all over the place. You're hiring the bodies. You're expecting them to perform as good as any other operator would perform, but they don't own the performance of the facility. They don't have responsibility for how the facility performs from a treatment process perspective. Design, build, operate is a contract model that integrates the operations into it, and the design builder and the operator, whether they're separate entities or one entity, they actually own the performance of the facility. And so as they're operating it, if they need to fix the dishwasher, they'll fix the dishwasher. They're essentially acting as the owner of the facility, even though they don't have title on it. And that's a very different, that's a performance-based operations model. And it's as you can imagine, a much riskier prospect, right? And so in order for an operator to sign up for that, they have to be involved in the design and construction, right? And that, no operator is going to come into a plant that's well along or even existing plant or even one that's new and say, I'm gonna take over this plant and guarantee for you that it's gonna work. They gotta be in on the ground floor to do that. Poseidon is a DBO project, and there are Twin Oaks Valley is a DBO project in San Diego County that I worked on. It's a very successful model. It's also very limited in the number of competitors who are able to do that, right? Performance-based operations in a DBO bid shouldn't even be legal to do, which I don't think it is in your case anyway, as a single contract. Our thinking here is let's do the best we can to get an operator involved early, and if we can get them involved early, they ought to be a market for them to pick up some performance responsibility. And so the model here, and this is something we proposed similar to West Basin that's sort of sitting on the shelf that we've been thinking about a lot, is let the design builders bring an operator along with them as part of this procurement process. And as they're designing the plant, let the operator figure out their costs for operating it and taking the performance risk as they're interacting with the design builder. And should they be able to figure out that this is going to be a good plant, they can operate it, they can own some of the risk, maybe not as much performance risk as a full DBO, but maybe more than a contract operations. It could be splitting the baby a little bit, that you could then reach a separate contractual agreement with them to pick up the operations. They could support the design builder through the construction phase and commissioning the thing, and then pick it up and take it over at the end. And the downside, if you can't reach that agreement, or they're not willing to take a appropriate level of performance or risk in your judgment, the risk to you is you might have paid them for some involvement in the design, which is a good thing, because you want them sitting at the table.
You want the operator input to better design the facility,
So
right?
you
How to
essentially
operate.
hired them as a consultant along the way, and then you take an off-ramp with them, and you either go to traditional contract operations, or you do it early enough where you figure out how to bring the staff, develop your own in-house staff. And this is really focused on the advanced treatment. I think there's an underlying assumption here that Santa Cruz their operators will operate the facility that's on their site, although, that could be something that we discuss further, but this is really for the site that you guys are running.
So are there any of these O&M organization companies, whatever, that would have the engineering and design moxie to be able to even do this stuff?
For a standalone operations, yes, there's a pretty good market. There's 3 big national operations companies and a number of regional ones who do contract operations, who in my view would step into this model. If you combine it as a single contract DBO, you get down to less than 3. That's why I don't recommend DBOs. I used to work for one of those companies, and there isn't a lot of competition, right? And so it really narrows the field for a project this size. Not highly likely you would get enough bidders in a DBO model.
So some of our utility neighbors in the vicinity, they have the contract operators that are just running their facility.
Yeah,
So having the contract operations, that's fairly
that's standard. Right.
And then getting them involved up front where they have a foot in the door already, they can decide on the operation cost as well as the facility.
Performance risk.
That might
We're doing
be.
that right now in Southern California for groundwater consultants, for the city, where they pay to have American Water provide design review during our design process.
Good to hear.
And they actually are going through what Leffin described right now, because American Water I don't know what the details are, but they're procuring a separate entity now to actually operate it, because American Water said to step away from that. So they're actually releasing an RFQ. There's 5 bidders, I think, that we saw.
But
there's a number of contract, and the other aspect of this, we'll get into the details, but I wouldn't actually, I would say an operator does not have to be exclusive to a single design build team. So to spread the operations love around multiple design builders, I'd let them team up with, let the market bear that out, and if there's a good operator, they might be on 2 or 3 different teams.
And I think an important point to mention here, as Lefin touched on it, Santa Cruz may decide, that's within their confines, within their boundary, they want to operate their tertiary facility.
Yeah.
That may play out. Advanced water purification, a different story. Maybe Santa Cruz's water department could have operators that come out and operate. A lot of possibilities.
This isn't the advanced water treatment is a particularly large operations contract, so I think it would actually attract a pretty good segment of the market.
Because all you're talking about 2-3 operators, right, in terms of number of bodies?
Leslie, your design builder would procure then a sub as that? Or
I would call it I would call it a partner.
A partner.
They would be contracted separately. I think that's very important.
Through Soquel.
But we wouldn't have to do that procurement.
It would be, I would lump it all into the same procurement. I would have them team together and go through one procurement and then award 2 contracts from the procurement. One would be, the first contract you award is for the pre-construction phase. This is basically a design and engineering contract. This would also be a professional services. So you have 2 professional services contract. Each of them would have an option. This one would have the option to go to design, build, construction. This one would have the option to go to longer-term operations.
And we'll probably look within the boundaries of the funding mechanism, whether it's SRF or grants or whichever. Do they allow for that kind of setup? If not, we procure them separately, still within a team, but 2 separate.
The reason I really like this concept, and it is, I will be upfront, this is not common. There's some flavors of it floating around Sonny's familiar with and I'm familiar with, but this is pretty much a new concept for the market, is it brings real operators who run facilities like this into the design process, and I think that would be money well spent, because it takes some of these, we're going to make this thing cheap, or we're not looking for the 20-year life cycle or whatever it brings the folks who know that stuff to the table. We have these kind of people at Brown and Caldwell, but this would be dedicated people who are supplementing what we do, and I think it'll increase your upfront costs by a couple %, but I think it's money well spent.
So there is a change, though, a cost. In the blue phase, there's 6 months where we would be involved with the builder in doing the joint design.
That's right.
This, we would have to play sort of umpire between the blue and the yellow for a year while they're...
Yeah, I wouldn't let them duke it out. I use an analogy when I do the training about the kids in the back seat. These guys will have to have their own arrangement between each other, so.
Okay.
We don't have to slap them.
Yeah. I'm gonna get one of those chauffeured vehicles with the window that comes up. I'm gonna put it up.
Okay.
I think your point's actually well taken. There is, not having it be a single contract does have the downsides, but I don't think you can do it.
Can't do the same.
I think the nice thing about that yellow is that if no one bids on that, then we just go to the ordinary.
That's right.
We were going to do it anyway, right? Yeah, that's the approach.
We can even get to the point where it's optional. I mean, if we don't get enough market traction with this, it's not the end of the world. I think it's a good idea. I think design builders will be okay with bringing an operator along. I don't think they'll be super thrilled, but they'll be happy they don't have to do it themselves, right? So
That's a good, logical way to go.
I don't know if you want to
Unless we had staff that were already knowledgeable.
Sure, let's repoll. You comfortable with this?
I am.
I actually do have an opinion. I think it's a good idea to get the outbreaks involved.
Yeah, I especially like it with the O&M. That's the part I just didn't see how all the interconnections would work together.
I like bringing in an operator from the beginning.
Me too. Okay, you get 5 on that.
All right.
We're going up.
Okay. So that's the plants. Any questions on that? I'll move on to the pipes. So we got a list of things to do here, right? And
That's growing.
all right.
Oh, it took us an hour and a half. Move along.
And we got an hour left.
All right. So for the pieces of pipe, this is not the wells, but just the pipe. We took the approach that you would handle the design. You've got some basic routing and basis of design to do up front, and that you would do the design in very much the traditional way, and that You guys know pipe pretty well. There's not a lot of performance risk with pipe. You know how you want it, and so doing the normal design process is probably more than appropriate. But we did have some challenges of how can we speed things up, and how can we bring contractor insight for a very complex urban pipeline situation, particularly, this is my bias, is are there more opportunities for trenchless pipe construction? As it took me 20 minutes already to go a mile to get here this afternoon. I'm thinking, what if they're laying pipe on this road at the same time? It's like, so how can we manage that and create the opportunity for creative construction approaches?
So let me jump in real quick. You know, before some of the delivery model discussions, I was going with the mindset of treatment facilities. That's something we don't do. Design build, progressive design build. Pipeline, we know that, design bid build. Injection wells, we know that, design bid build.
Yeah.
That's the approach. I started talking with our design team, and they, when we talk about this timeline, having the pipeline completed by 2022, their jaws were open. They're like, oh, there's no way in hell we can do that, because it's total 11 miles long of pipeline from Santa Cruz to Mid-County, and from Mid-County to injection wells. It's a dense urban core, narrow streets, busy locations, several stream crossings, several utility crossing, unknown utilities. To vet all of that would require substantial design period, 100% design, and that didn't leave enough time for the contractor to come out and actually build it. We are spending a lot more. So we started debating, how do we compress the schedule, how do we manage, mitigate the risk? And
Plus you have to have the pipelines done 6 months earlier to start up commissioning.
Yes, you do.
Absolutely. So that's where Left Wing came into.
Yeah, and part of the big challenge with the timing, where what Anoop's alluding to, is you got to do a lot of field investigations. Normally, if you're doing that as just a pure design bid build project, you've got to hire a third party to do that, because you got to go dig stuff up. You don't have a contractor.
Potholing, geotech, surveying, a lot of that. Yep.
And so the idea here is you hire a construction manager at risk early during the design process. They come along as you're designing it, and they start pricing the work. They start figuring out how to package the work depending on how you want it packaged. If you want smaller packages that support folks, you know, the type of contractor who's done pipe work for you locally, or larger packages that might bring in some outside regional contractors, or a bit of combination of both. They can help with the site investigations. They can tell you where to do more design or less design. There are stretches of this where you probably don't need 100% design for pipe, where the contractor can take a line on a map and do just fine, thank you very much. Versus, you know, more complex parts where they really want more detail and more upfront work. And so they're involved in it. Now, you've procured a contractor without them doing a bid, right? You've procured them much like a progressive design builder on a fee basis, but you let them, work and figure it out and get started where they can get started, maybe before design is done, and you let them figure out the means and methods for the trickier piece. You get them done early so that the water is available to the plant for commissioning. This line is pretty critical, line up, because you gotta have the pipes in place to bring water to the plant.
And take it away.
And you know, if you get to the point where having a CMAR contractor doesn't fit what you want to do, again, there's not a lot of downside here, because you can bid out packages. You do have time for the off-ramp here. And you can mix and match different parts of this any way you want. I did a big urban pipeline corridor project in Tampa where we had just about we had CMAR, we had design build, we had hard bid. You know, we just went through methodically with every segment of this thing and figured out the best way to have it delivered. Did a lot more trenchless than we ever imagined. There are folks out there who can be pretty competitive when you talk about, you know, if you assign a price to, you know, a theoretical price to closing traffic or disrupting traffic, trenchless becomes pretty competitive in the mix, and there's guys out there who know it, guys and gals, I should say. And so this is creating a dynamic opportunity it may or may not work at the end. You might decide to hard bid a lot of it with folks you know, but
An important element to this is getting a CMAR that has done pipelines in this market,
Yeah.
in this area, someone who understands the local geography, local topography.
and
Local
you know,
traffic.
Yeah.
there's big pipeline guys and there's smaller. A lot of times they team together because the big guys can get pipe cheap right now, cheaper,
And
less
I
expensive.
don't know if, Taj, you've run into this issue where designers would do the 100% design and say, oh, I think this intersection we can do open trench, we'll open it up. Versus contractor may have a drilling unit and then say, yeah, ignore that design, actually I'm going to go trenchless, that's much more efficient for me and less traffic disruptive. So getting a CMAR involved, having the right mindset from the constructability standpoint, that might be better
Or
for
the
the
contractor who can pothole and if given what's under there, fix it at the one step, if it's not a regulated utility, right?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we don't have a lot of tie-ins or services, so it's a transmission main that can dive a little deeper
Yeah.
Stretch out.
and avoid all that traffic.
And really, you know, I don't know that we are definitive about what advantages you'll pick up. We're trying to create the opportunity for you to get more voices at the table who know how to do this kind of a pipeline instead of, you know, just doing a traditional design where you throw the plans out and see what happens. So get people at the table who are qualified, who understand how to do this work.
And this price certainty, when does the price become real?
Well, I think you could get prices for pieces of it all the way in multiple GMPs. We show one GMP here, you'd probably have a half a dozen. In terms of an overall, all the pipe together, I think you would have a conceptual level price, you know, pretty quick between, just like you have up here, between the 30 and 60% design phase.
Why do you say 6 or 8 different?
Well, just because of the geographic divisions of things, and you might do some intersections by themselves, and right, you want to make it efficient, and maybe it's the same contractor you would go, but maybe you take a little piece off, and you know Joe Blow contractors worked on this intersection 1,000,000 times. We're going to take that piece and bid it out because they're going to know how to. They have the as-built or something, right?
CMAR might come along and say, you know what, those the stream crossings by Santa Cruz, those are going to be those are the ones that are going to take most amount of time. Why don't you carve out a package?
Yeah.
Do those, design those first, so we can start building them while you're finishing abreast of the pipeline design.
Right.
You don't have to wait for everything to be designed.
And whatever
and then
permit's
go.
holding me up doesn't hold up the whole job. I'm going to carve that piece out, and it might not get built till way down here. But in the meantime, I can work on everything else, right? So
it's still the same contractor, just different packages.
although in my experience, you could carve out a piece and give it to another contractor. You could take the off-ramp for a piece if you wanted to. Maybe not preferable, but certainly you have the flexibility to do that. Questions on that one? And so this is a traditional, you know, there is no performance risk transfer here. You're getting a lot of constructability and efficiency and creativity and the means and methods for building this thing, but your designer is still, you know, defining the size of the pipe and, you know, the standard of care for how much water is going to get where.
In some ways, this is similar to what we've been doing for years now,
Probably so.
of having some of the design happen off-site,
That's right.
out of the building.
It is a natural extension of people working together.
Oh, and I think the important piece, you know, we talk about construction management at risk.
Yeah.
Here, the risk is actually transferred over to the construction manager, or you're transferring that risk over. So, you know,
Pricing risk.
Pricing risk. There is a misconception about this. This is not a risky procurement. It's actually you're transferring that risk over. This is actually better for the district standpoint.
Yeah, because you're getting earlier pricing. That's the risk transfer. So I can go to the last piece or pause there for a second. That's all pretty straightforward.
Okay.
I'm good with it.
Okay?
That seems reasonable.
Left foot, I assume? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No.
They'll give you a price based on what they know at that time. If there are unforeseen conditions,
Yeah.
you're going to be back on that.
The beauty of this method, though, is you could get a better handle on unforeseen conditions because they get to help you decide where to look. And I think contractors have a better eye of where to look, to be honest. That's my bias, right? It's like, I'm not worried about there, but I'm worried about there, and so let's go dig a little bit, right? But you're right, there is no subsurface conditions, and unforeseen conditions are always gonna stay with the agency. Doesn't matter
Change
what.
orders happen.
Change orders happen, no doubt about it.
Anyway,
So, Dr. Daniels, you wanted to finish up the vote counting on this one?
That's 5.
Okay, fine, all right.
All right, the last,
Opinion, right? Opinions.
Opinions.
No votes.
No votes, that's right.
Just consensus.
all right, so that's everything together, and now let's just throw the wells on there, which we didn't do significant analysis on because our thinking was, you guys know how to do those. There's a little bit of float in the terms of the time allowed, and so don't fix what's not broken. So here we'll deviate from our creativity and say, do what you know how to do, and use design bid build for those.
And then I think the idea is, from the testing standpoint, from the permitting standpoint, we want one of the wells to be constructed for this aspect, delivering the water. Rest of the wells can follow along. This is not on a critical path, but the idea is we still, there is a float on the back end, there's float on the front end. We'll figure out and schedule how it fits.
And it's sort of nice because you got a lot of stuff in green here. We got a couple procurements, so we could sort of move when that procurement happens to be between the other procurements to level out the staff work.
40-hour work weeks.
Yeah. That'd be nice.
Well, I think there's some planning stuff that needs to be part of that too, in terms of
Yeah.
the requirements with DDW,
right.
citing the recharge,
Permitting and-
citing the recharge wells and the monitoring wells.
And you bring up, the permitting overlay on this is really complicated and may move some of these bars around as we get more into that. I've got to give that caveat up front too.
The next phase for us is to really start working with DDW, think about these delivery models and how does the permitting overlay with this, where their comfort level is, and
Particularly for these, those are involved regional board too.
So that's how it all lays out together. With one little extra line that's supposed to be there that bugs you.
Oh, dang.
fix it now.
Can we get a copy of that?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
This will all be part of the minutes of the,
Okay, but I like the color copy because now that we've been through it step by step, this will help me remember where it is.
electronically.
These colors should match.
Electronically, please.
These colors should match what's in what's in your book too.
So is this the end of 3.1?
That's it. Well, do you have one more piece?
No, I think this is,
Recap.
I guess, directive or consensus on some of the recommendations, just to recap, treatment facilities, design, build, nuances within that. We don't need to define those. Conveyance infrastructure, CMAR, and then design, bid, build for the recharge wells. And again, I think we've gone.
We have more details about all of those.
Yes, a lot more of those. Just the aspect of what is upcoming over the next 6 months. This is the planning phase. We want to continue the draft EIR review process. We already have the projects under projects or work authorized under the planning grant, so we want to advance at least those planning grant work. We want to continue to finalize this delivery model discussion, some of the permitting schedule overlay that we talked about, and we want to begin the market outreach and the sounding for this. We need to start some discussion with City of Santa Cruz. The work has already started, but understanding how they would like to get the tertiary facility or secondary facility, whatever the options within the EIR that are out there, understand their preferences and keep those into consideration. And there's the type of facility, ownership, operation, maintenance, a lot of those, again, devil is on the details, and we want to start the process there. And all of that with the notion that if the EIR is certified, we are ready to have a jump start. So it's not presuming anything, it's just a matter of
given the back end is already fixed, we want to be in the best position to be ready. So
Capitalize on the grant.
funding.
In fact, it's if the EIR is certified and the project gets approved.
And the project gets
We have to do
approved
both
too.
of those.
Right. So I think that's sort of the snapshot of the next 6 months. We've had good interaction throughout the presentation, but any questions, any aspect? I think I put this graphic up there that in the grant application, we are showing the worst case scenario for the pipelines and the funding standpoint, and some of the delivery models are already embedded in there. The grant application is going out Friday, at least for Title 16, and the following week would be for Prop 1. So,
Yeah, when you say worst case, he's saying the most expensive
Most expensive.
option from a financial, not from environmental or technical.
Correct. yeah, this is purely from the financial step planning standpoint.
It's worst case for her aspect.
That's right. And with that, I think we can turn it over to Leslie for.
Before we do that, let's have some public comment on that section. Anyone?
Thank you. I do have some questions. Becky Steinbruner. Going back to the off-ramp of the, I think it was the second, the progressive design build. I'm familiar with, and I know you said there's too much concern about off-ramps, but it's just something to bring up about reluctance of, if you do have to take the off-ramp, the reluctance of other companies to come in and assume work that has already begun and they have not been involved or cannot verify quality. I know that's a problem in another area, project area in our county. Can you talk about that? And I have one other question. Do you want me to ask?
3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Then I will ask my other question. Actually, two questions. Who are the three big national operators that you feel would be interested in being involved in this project? You said there were three big ones. And then my final question about the pipe. How does trenchless work when you're going through, or possibly going through sensitive archaeological areas, or along, I see you've got the yellow line along the roadways, but in the EIR, it's possible to go along the railroad tracks. Those are contaminated soils. So how does trenchless work going through sensitive archaeological areas and also potentially contaminated soil areas? Those are my questions. Thank you.
So, do you want to answer those?
I was going to answer the middle one, where the big firms. I think that's very simple, and then we can get into the other ones. As far as the three big firms, and Lefin can chime in, we're going to do the market sounding. We will understand, we'll reach out to different firms and see if anybody is interested in playing in this area. That's all part of the planning that we will discover over the next 6 months.
I don't think we can speak to anyone's level of interest since it hasn't been gauged, but there's pretty widely available industry rankings out there for, the large operations companies. I think there's published rankings.
So I could just Google.
You could.
You should have them.
Okay. What search terms would you recommend?
Water treatment operations companies or contract operations companies.
Thank you.
I would say for that last question, Becky, you should route that into the EIR since we're in a public comment period. That's a great kind of a question to go into the EIR, just to stay within the process.
Okay.
But certainly, right now, a designer designs it, someone bids on it, they're taking over the design work done by somebody else.
Yeah, the first question relative to are there companies who have bid the off-ramp, I think that's in favor of an earlier off-ramp because it's less defined project. But certainly where I have seen the off-ramp go to a second bid, it's been well received by the market.
Anyone else? Saying no one? Okay, let's take a little break, why don't we, and then do the finance. Okay.
So I've asked Anu to leave the slide up for a minute, just so we could all embrace the scope
Do you feel the scope? I feel the scope.
of what we're looking at here, because this timeline directly overlays our rate study. So we're in the process right now of developing the finance plan that's supposed to come back to the board at the August 21st meeting. And as part of that, we're taking a look at this and trying to figure out how we fit that into our directive. The board indicated at the last meeting we had that they wanted us to look at 2 finance plan scenarios. Both of them include the Pure Water Soquel project. One is with debt financing, the other is with a combination of debt financing and grants. So as you can see from this, as Anu pointed out, there's a lot of design work that has to happen within the next year. That has not been included in our 2018-19 budget, which means
Right, so a lot of the planning work is, none of the...
program planning, but none of the design work is.
Well, but first half of 2019 is green.
Right, we had to fund
Yes.
that work.
That work.
That was what I was telling Anoop at the break, that between this window,
From here
No,
to...
no.
from
July.
end of June that
Under
way,
the-
we're gonna have to look and see
Zero.
what's funded and what's not
Not funded,
funded. And
And so for us, that's going to be outside the scope of our rate study, because those rates won't even go into play until midway through spring of next year. So we've got to find a way to cover the cost of this, probably out of reserve.
What's in ballpark estimate?
So,
The design and the,
For the, basically doing the RFQs and basic design.
And then
First half of 19.
I probably would love to go back and actually look at the numbers rather than throwing out a number here. Let us do some analysis, study, and then
It has a little bit of an impact.
it does have.
And so we'll have to decide how we're going to handle that, because our reserves have already been depleted a little bit. We knew we were going to have to build them back up during the rate study. So if we devote more reserves to this, that just gives us our starting point for our finance plan, and our rate study will be that.
well, one of the things we talked about is if we're doing the RFI, no, the AMI, right, AMI. We're currently putting $1 million in each of the 2 years to pay for that all, and if we decide to make that be an offset for WEOs, then we can use some of that money to pay for that, so that would save some.
So can I chime in? So that's exactly the discussion we had amongst the managers at 3 o'clock today. So looking at, it's not just pure water. There's a $6.5 million tank here. There's
Yes,
a pipeline. I mean, we've got a serious CIP program. So is that okay, buddy?
Well, I kind of
Okay,
wanted to point
okay,
out
okay.
here too, as we're looking at this, that we're talking about revenue streams in order to fund this type of project. And when you look at this, even the ancillary funding we're talking about, if we're talking about grant support, if we're talking about SRF or WIFIA loans, those things come in later down the line. We probably won't see proceeds from those types of funding mechanisms until late 2020, probably 2021, before we start to see those types of things come
They'll
come
fund
through.
backwards, but the money...
Now, they can
Right.
reimburse us for costs already spent, but we have to have cash flow to spend first, which means we're
So that
going
was
to
your
have to go
short-term
out
loans.
for debt financing, probably in 2019, and we're going to have to go out for enough debt financing that it gives us the cash flow to take us through most of this
Whatever.
work until we can start bringing in some of those other funding mechanisms.
Leslie, you're talking about the financial year, not the, when you say late 2020, you're referring to a financial year, not the calendar year.
Well, when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the second half of the calendar.
Count when we look at this.
So that'd be a
January to June.
It's February, March. If we end up getting Prop 1 grant in the next round, I think we can be ready to start putting in invoicing by January, February of 2020. Right?
If we get awarded, then that starts that date for not counted as reimbursement, or not counted as a match, but as a reimbursement. So it may take a while to come in, but at least there's more certainty that that money will be coming in.
It's the flow.
It's the cash flow that I need to be able to cover in the interim.
Well, and plus, we also have to be responsible that if we don't get any grants at all, we also need to make this work. So in which case, the early funding we would get from loans would just continue on and on and on. I mean, part of the...
And so
the
there's
district-
kind of a dance that we're doing here. Do we, between our reserve levels and our debt coverage ratio, we have some constraints in how and when we can borrow and how much. So then we're going to have to piece together a little bit, how much can we borrow early on? Do we have to stagger that borrowing throughout the length of the project so that we're meeting our debt coverage ratio targets? So all of that is kind of going into this finance plan, which has become a fairly complex exercise, and I think we're stressing our consultants out just a little bit.
Do you know what the debt coverage ratio requirement is for?
We have set as an organization, we have
I
set
know
a
that,
debt
but I
coverage
mean-
ratio of 1.7.
1.25 is the legal.
It's
one.
still,
1.2.
okay.
1.2, sorry.
With the debt we currently have.
So that hasn't changed.
If we went out for another round of financing, they may set a different debt coverage
Number.
requirement for us. So it depends upon the financial instrument.
What's the
When are
timing?
the grant notifications?
That's what I
Year
wanted to
name.
ask. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that same question.
So that grant goes
When
in
does that happen?
2 weeks, and when do you get notified?
For the Prop 1, we are putting in the concept proposal in August. We hope to be invited back like October, November for a final application, submit that in December, and then they'll turn around and likely they'll try and get the awards out sometime in early winter, early spring, so that they can kick off that whole round 3 again. So that's the kind of window. I think everything is falling somewhere in that first quarter of calendar year 2019.
Both of them.
For Title 16, we likely will know before Aqua, fall Aqua. So October, November is when they come out.
Yeah, right at that time.
Because we saw a lot of, people who had gotten the answers by then.
But that's the 20 million. That takes us a long time.
Yeah.
Right. That one, you go in and, you're only getting like a guarantee, if you get it, a guarantee of like 2 to 3 million, and you have to keep applying.
Right,
The
right.
Prop 1, we're applying for up to 50, and they will let us know if we get that amount or not, right somewhere in 2019.
And then after that, it's just a reimbursement request or match request for the financial outlay.
I think one thing to consider too is that these are competitive, right? So if we don't get either, we're going to apply again, and so that does push out then that cash flow. We'll learn what we're deficient in our grant packages and applications and apply that to the next one. But assuming the third round of Prop 1 money then would come out again in the summer of 2019, and then we would know early winter of 2020.
So we should recognize that even if we get the full 50 and the full 20, that's 70, there's still 20 million that we'd have to get for some kind of borrowing. So
But
doing early borrowing might just mean we're getting that process started.
But Dr. Daniel, and from the cash flow standpoint, project will be built out up to 2023, and you're going to be making payments as facilities are getting built up. So some of those can be delayed into 2022, 2023, when you actually borrow that money to pay for it. And if by that time you'll have a certainty around the Prop 1, and only the balance is what you're reaching up. So
No, it's not.
So we don't know how quickly they're going to do their invoicing and pay us back. Sometimes it's
It's a lengthy
quite
process.
slow,
Yeah.
so.
And let's not get wed to a particular number, that
Yes,
there's
it
some big
changes.
error bars. Well, 90 million was as low as what?
63 to 134, something like,
Yeah,
right?
so
Yeah.
it's,
Yep.
And big error bars on grant.
yeah,
Even bigger there.
Yeah.
It could go to zero.
yeah.
So, go ahead and.
Can't
if you
go
would
up
mind pulling
those.
up
So
the-
let me prelude this. So, recognizing this and trying to look it through a customer's eyes, how to make, kind of the best value. I mean, there's cost and then there's value. And so coming to those points, and how do we put projects in the right sequencing so the rates are at the most what we would deem acceptable to our customers. So that's where I think you're going next, right?
Right.
With this. Okay, so let's jump in.
So now what we're looking at is we're taking a look, and we met this afternoon as a management team, and we're taking a look at the 5-year CIP that Taj has put together for us. And so I've kind of parsed down the projects that were in that 5-year CIP. And we know that well monitoring and mitigation is something that we're kind of required to maintain, so that's going to stay. After talking with Taj, the Gunnison Way well is kind of a project that's integral to moving that water, that Water Soquel water, once we have it, into other areas of our district. So that's kind of an integral project to making this whole thing work. There are some other projects that we felt that maybe we could push out, like that Toss Creek property acquisition and the Country Club well replacement. But we know that we want to go ahead and do the treatment plant for 123 TCP. So there's some wiggle room we feel on some of these projects. Go ahead and go to the next slide, if you wouldn't mind. We've also got a lot of main replacement projects out there. Taj indicated that the Rio Del Mar interchange is another one that's pretty critical for moving water throughout the service areas. So we'll try and hang on to those that we know are going to be part of our Pure Water Soquel effort and making this whole thing work throughout the district. But there's others that I think we probably do have a little bit of wiggle room on the timing. So it does mean perhaps going through, I'll take you through just a couple more slides here real quick. Looking at the next one. We've got some transmission projects that we feel there's a little wiggle room on. The Soquel Drive main replacement there in 2019-20, that other 1.6 million will likely go ahead and come out of what's left of our certificates of participation and use up the rest of those funds. But a lot of these can be moved off to subsequent years. And then the last one, this is where we've got a big project, which is the Quail Run tank. That's over 2 years, $7 million. The question is, can we push that one out any further? Because of the timing of borrowing and getting our reserve levels up to where they need to be to borrow and maintaining that debt coverage ratio, the projects that we're doing in the next year or two are going to be really critical in terms of timing. So we don't know if there's a way to move some of these things off. And I guess one of my questions of the board would be, what is your comfort level with us making those decisions to push projects out a little bit?
Yeah, and with a focus toward what makes Pure Water Soquel work, and then what does not do damage by moving the others out.
Well, we've always done this. When we have a financial tightening, we move projects back and forward. So that's the great thing about projects, is often we can move them back and forwards. If we have excess money, we can pull something forward and do it this year. And if we are tight, we can push it back and do it next year. We've done that, so it's a project by project thing. We need to look at Quail Run. Could we put that off a year? Would that hurt us? Would it be, we go through the entire list and do the same thing?
Could we put it off 3 or 4 years?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, I think the tank inspections need to happen. They're only $3,000.
Yeah. But Leslie,
okay, we've decided.
My philosophy is that the staff knows more than I do about the projects and the timing and the financial realities, so I'm totally comfortable with the staff making that decision.
Yeah, I mean, you may not even be totally aware of the timing unless you looked at an old finance plan, so, but we're just trying to be forthright, and this is how we're approaching the situation. You can see stormwater is not funded up there, Rochelle, and I know that's an interest to yours, so I want to be clear on that.
I'd like it to at least be something that you're looking into funding for and
For grant funding.
not just
Or
grant, but partner funding.
Partner,
Yeah.
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 Yeah, we discussed that at the
'Cause it's
finance
not really
meeting
that
yesterday.
expensive.
Yesterday, and it was
Status of the golf course.
I spoke up, about the status of the golf course and also about the sense of our board was that we were going to be looking at partners to do that with, and we didn't have any partners to do, so it could change, but
It could change, we could
the
get partners.
cost would be changing too, so there wasn't much point in
But
putting a
our-
cost there or figuring it as part of a, cost basis for our rates.
And what I wasn't clear on last time, I mean, certainly our grant person, Lydia, she's looking across the board, whether it's river transfer, stormwater recharge, and there's grants out there, and we're evaluating each one as it comes up, making a kind of a no-go. Do we have a good chance? Well, let's go for it. If we don't, we back on it.
Well, I know that the State Water Board's interested in funding projects that have multiple benefits, which would include, flooding, recharge,
Runoff, that contamination.
Right.
Reduce that. Yep.
all of those things.
Yeah.
And that kind of project would be something that they'd be interested in funding. And if we could get partners, I think it would be it's not going to be millions of dollars from us. Maybe not 3,400, but.
Yeah, and we've been working close with the county, on this, and UCFC and others, so we'll continue that.
I just don't like the idea of just not even thinking about it because.
Well, it's not thinking about it, it's just that there's not money specifically budgeted. If something comes up and there's an opportunity, well, maybe we should, that's where one of
That's
these.
where working with Lydia.
I guess-
And also working with the county, because they would have to be one of the, part of the triangle.
Yeah, probably.
I think Lydia needs to talk to Eric, I don't remember his last name, but who we had some conversations with about this.
On a more general term, I'm also comfortable with, staff being able to try and balance what needs to be done first, but I also like getting updates.
Right.
Like I think Jackie said,
what's gonna
right,
change.
staff knows better than us.
Right, but-
And they should make proposals and bring it to the board, because there may be issues that some
Right.
board members care about more than others.
Well, you'll see this one.
You'll see it in August with the
August.
finance
Exactly,
plan. We'll
exactly.
identify what we've shifted about.
Yeah, and we've had to do that. We've had multiple times where we've looked at, this one, these puzzle pieces.
Yeah,
can
maybe
be
your
moved here.
corrections, we do, or updates on the whole thing, so.
And then, under other, we do have some question marks. I guess the water purchase from the city of Santa Cruz, we've got a contract through 2020, but there is a question on what the cost might be to us from that point forward.
And I think it's just December of 2020,
So.
that would not actually
Might
include
be.
any water there.
That might increase. And then the other question was the AMI project.
Yes.
If we could WDO fund that might free up
That would help
some
a lot.
resources. Yeah.
And I think Shelley's coming back, we'd actually deferred from the last meeting because it was so
I think that's all.
robust to August, to for you guys to get a peek at that, whether you're comfortable with that contract.
And another consideration, we do have water capacity fees that we've amassed that would probably be available for spending on a supplemental supply.
We need to decide when that becomes feasible, though.
Right.
We can't certainly do it on the
We can't-
design.
Right, no, it would
But
have
at
to
some
be on
point,
the
we
actual
can
construction
apply
where
those
we
funds.
Apply those funds, and that's some additional funds available to us.
Do you know how much we have?
I'm trying to remember, I think there's about 3 million,
That's not trivial.
2.5, maybe 2.5, 3 million, somewhere around in there. So every little bit helps.
Yes.
So there's where we're kind of balancing things on the finance side of things, and depending on whether, when we do the two different scenarios, the one with the grants may have projects in it that the one without grants might not. The other thing we were talking about, just tossing ideas out, we do have some of those projects like Gunnison Way Well and the Quail Run Tank that we could consider bundling with debt for Pure Water Soquel if we felt those were critical to being able to move and store water and move it about the district. So if we're going to go out for, 45 million, 20 million, can we add 6 or 7 million for some of these other projects?
And as you talked about, if we can get a funding source, a loan source, for which we could do early payment, and that would give us flexibility if we got piles of grant funding.
Right, then we can just
Pay off part of it.
We're talking really big numbers. I think it's important to get down to monthly bills when we communicate.
Right. We
Right.
discussed that today.
And
What
that's-
it means to them, the most genuine thing.
The finance plan numbers have to go into the rate model, and then that's what they are able to use to determine
Right.
what those look like ultimately to our customers.
Take a look on your bill.
But is it, 25 cents a day or
Yeah.
50 cents
Yeah,
or
whatever it is.
$1? Or certainly not $10. So it's,
No, but that's a
Yeah.
good point. Percentages can be misleading.
And as I understand it, we'll be bringing rates back to you at the September meeting. Will be a preliminary look at rates. So,
I think that's it. There's no more
no,
finance
that was
sites?
it.
Okay.
That was it.
Good.
Any comments on that?
Any direction for me? Is there anything specifically you want me to take into consideration as we're building this finance plan?
drink plenty of wine.
Or go straight to margarita?
I think hard stuff applies here.
Well, I did have a question about the Santa Cruz water purchases. Are we updating the agreement to continue, or?
Have you talked to Rosemary about that?
We've talked a little bit. She's, and that's where we know about the price. She's given quite a range and indicated this is definitely an introductory price.
The 100,000?
Yeah, I think one of the things we were waiting on was whether we had to have treatment or not, because that would partially dictate the agreement. So if we had to do a lot of treatment, we weren't going to go in and put all that on for a 2-year agreement, right? If we had to put something at each wellhead. So now that's opened up a little bit, but we're working on multiple fronts with multiple agreements, so we'll add that one back to the...
I assume she's still talking 300 acre feet, or is she talking other?
Yeah, that's about the range she's talking about, depending on the drought and stuff, but the price has changed. The price is changing because they have to...
They don't know what that is yet.
No, she gave us a range, and I think, what was that? I think it was $1,000 an acre foot to $6,000 an acre foot. I know Scott McGilvery was in here. Yeah. We'll see.
That's more expensive than this thing.
Class 5.
They have their, they have to be honest with their customers, and they have to take in, they're not going to give us the marginal cost of water. If they go build all this and it only costs $1 to produce an extra gallon, they're going to take that, they're not going to do that. They're going to do what any agency would do. What's that cost to make that water, and then,
Have us pay the full
have
cost
us
of
be
it.
part of that. Yeah, yeah. But, so they're having to figure that out because they don't even know the cost of their project. I mean, that's, they're doing a $50 million pipeline right now, we saw in the paper, but that's not even their project. That's just,
And what's our estimate of what our water cost us? How many hundreds?
well, there's a couple different ways to look at it. If you take our total,
Currently?
Yeah, currently.
Was it 300 per acre foot?
oh, what they're charging us for that?
No.
No.
What we cost to
Boy,
produce.
Well, there's all-in costs.
I haven't, yeah, there's electrical and chlorine costs just for that to do it.
I think that was around 150.
It's around 150, 175 to 200, and then there's the total cost when you take our total budget. How so many millions.
Divided
Yeah,
by the-
divide it by acre feet, and that's 3,000, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, but
I haven't
that's
done
not-
it lately with the new number.
I'm talking more about the electricity to pump and.
Yeah, that's a couple hundred.
Yeah, that's a modest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's not,
That's not the
Well,
That's not
the
the total
infrastructure.
cost.
Yeah.
No, but that,
I mean, if we look
Yeah, it
at the
gives you
total
ranges.
cost of everything and you divide it by the acre feet, that's,
right, but if we get water from another place, it,
Sounds like even if we get water from the same place.
so from the same place, we don't have to do things to our transmission lines or think, So I do look at it as all that's on top of the transmissions and all the other stuff is on top of that.
Right.
So you have the cost for the water and then all this other cost. And if you're looking at your total cost, yeah, you have to take it all in. But if you're looking at a different source, I think that's really what you should look at.
Right.
You wouldn't think of that cost of the transmission into that?
and all the overhead
Yeah, the
and
overhead and the,
the engineers that we
Well,
employ.
another way to just play off that, I think maybe you're thinking out, or what we've thought about is, if say you build Pure Water Soquel and it's helping the community and everything, and then Santa Cruz comes along and has something, let's say 15 years down the road, they come up with something. If that cost of their water is less than the marginal cost of pure water, we could throttle back an accordion,
Sure.
and then when they don't have water, pump it up. So there's ways for these to work together, I think, to the benefit of the community, and by looking at pricing too.
But that's hard to do right now because we don't have
No,
numbers, we
it's
don't have
impossible to
volumes,
do
we don't
right
have
now.
timeframes.
Yeah.
It's just a wild guess of
Yeah.
what it could be.
Yeah, but there's compatibility potentially in the future.
Yes.
Yeah, so the question is, that I don't look at the total cost. I mean, the way I look at it is that there's a cost for operating the transmission systems, staffing.
Yeah, service.
The whole thing.
Provide a lot of service.
And I put that in a category, and then there's the cost for the water. And so when I'm looking at comparing what the whole water transfer costs, I look at the cost of the water part of it.
But when I pay my water bill, I'm paying for the whole thing per 100 cubic feet.
Yeah, so you could.
So that's the
It's just
cost of the
different ways to
water
look
for
at it.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's two ways.
Yeah.
It just depends what you're comparing it to. I mean,
I guess the other way to do it is, just add those costs up and see what the marginal difference is.
well, it doesn't, it's when it's just a small, and I'm counting, I know this is ridiculous, but 300 acre feet is it's a small fraction of what our district really needs. And so that Santa Cruz, it's small for Santa Cruz too. They can afford to just give us an introductory rate, but that if it were going to be a higher, we would have a higher demand, or they would be asked to supply more than that amount, they would be figuring the actual cost on all their facilities and pipes and everything to get that here.
yeah, I'm just wondering how they're coming up with their number.
Yeah, I mean, they have to enlarge pipes
Are they
to get
looking
us
at
water.
pumping and,
But, we could play that game too. They want
Yeah.
water back from us. We could add up all the projects that we have here,
Yeah.
including all the ones we've done in the last 10 years, and the ones we're going to do in the next 10 years. And, the price could be, thousands of dollars per acre feet.
Yeah.
And that's just as reasonable to charge them that, in fact, more so, because they're giving us water that they don't need in the wintertime, and we're giving them water that we need and they need in the summertime.
I mean, you got to be true to 218 at some point, but there are a lot of factors to take into account. Yeah, so, as far as that agreement extension, no, we
Still
have not.
undecided.
We haven't tackled that because we had to get through this first hurdle, which Taj and Christine have just kind of, with Black and Beach and Mark Edwards and that whole bunch have just kind of crossed that hurdle for the bench scale test. Now we'll enter the pilot test if there's any water this fall, hopefully, if everything lines up for winter. So we'll start on.
In progress.
What's that?
We're getting a little bit off topic.
Yeah. Well, you asked about the.
I did, I know.
But it sounds like this is the last real winter of that agreement.
Yeah. So I'll call Ruth.
So we get 1 year's worth of water.
Next year too.
Well, it ends December 20.
Right, this, you get 18 and 19.
1890, the 1890 season
It's right now, or,
Yeah.
is coming up. The next season is 1920.
Right. And he says December 20.
So we'll get winter.
Oh, that's right, 2 years, 2 years, you're right, you're right.
Okay, good.
That's better.
Here, Fred.
It was a lot of work to get that far.
Right.
All right, everybody good?
Yeah.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Well, at 8:30.
Our next official meeting is until August 21st.
21st, right.
How nice.
Are there any workshops?
Oh, there's,
Well, there's a,
Oh, wait.
EIR, public meeting is